Hello lovely people, in this video we'll be checking out Recoil 8-inch subwoofer. It's called Echo Pro PW8D2. Before we start, I would like to thank Recoil for sending me this, because they sent me, if you saw my previous videos, quite a few different speakers, 2 amplifiers, and this little, I want to call it baby subwoofer. So in this video, it's going to be a review of this subwoofer. We're going to take some objective measurements and we will compare it to a more premium option, which is the ESX shallow mount subwoofer that I reviewed previously. So without any further ado, let's take it out of the box and let's see what we have. I want to call this a baby subwoofer because I am really not used to having very little subwoofers. It does look cool, it is quite hefty, and it is a budget subwoofer. Now again, it's very difficult to gauge the price because it will depend where in the world you are. I think in the UK it's something about £100, in the US something similar, probably 100, probably less, like $80 or something, I'm not sure. For this subwoofer, it is 8-inch. There's 2 versions, there is a dual 2 and dual 4. So this is dual 2 ohm. It is rated 400 watts RMS. It does have a, I want to say, stamped steel basket with some kind of a very thick paint and coating. It does have this rubber boot around the magnet. This surround looks more like foam rather than rubber, and the cone itself, it looks to be carbon fiber, but I really doubted that it is carbon fiber because carbon fiber is bloody expensive. So I think it's just an imitation of carbon fiber, because again, this is a budget subwoofer. There's really not much to say about it. It's just, it is a chunky boy. We do have a red spider there, tinsel leads, quite thick for 400 watts RMS. These push terminals, they're very nice. And how does it compare if we're looking at the ESX subwoofer? And this is the baby ESX. So you can see cone is kind of the same. However, the mounting depth is very different. The ESX, since it is a shallow mount subwoofer, you can see that the mounting depth is different. Not by much, I want to say by, for my American friends, like half an inch. Like 8-inch subwoofers are small in general, but this one you can feel that it weighs much more than this. Now, in regards to the TS specs and parameters, we will have a look at the modeling as well. But the main difference between these two is the power handling, because this one takes a bit less, 300 watts. This one takes 400 watts. And the X-Max. X-Max of this is very difficult to find, but I managed to find it, and it is at 8.8 millimeters. This one has 12 millimeters. So even if you have a look at the surround itself, the Recoil surround looks bigger than the ESX. However, when you're looking at the excursion capabilities of a driver, do not look at the surround. Everybody thinks that the bigger surround you have, the more X-Max it has and the more output. No, really. Some cheap SPL subwoofers will have a massive mega surround, and they will have way less excursion than a quality subwoofer with a high roll surround. So you can see this is bigger, this is smaller. However, this one has more X-Max than this. The X-Max, it mainly depends on the spider and on the motor itself, and the surround is just, it just holds the cone in place. These subwoofers both work in very similar enclosures. I will be testing it only in sealed enclosure because this is kind of SQ focused. I don't want to play with all the ported because port will influence more than the actual enclosure. So both of them will work in very small enclosures from about 8 liters all the way up to like 15 to 16 liters. And we will be testing both of them in 2 different sizes enclosures. So let me show you my test enclosure. So this is the same enclosure that you saw when I was testing the ESX subwoofers, the smaller one and the bigger one. It is about 15 to 16 liters, sealed enclosure, a little bit of filling. So I have the same amount of filling for both subwoofers, and the screw pattern is exactly the same for both the Recoil and the ESX, which is very good because it's easy swap in and swap out. So what did I do to make the enclosure smaller? I used wood blocks. Each of these wood blocks is like 1 liter, and this is like 0.9 liters. liters. So when I'm putting all these blocks inside, I am taking away from the enclosure close to like 6 liters, almost 6 liters. And then instead of 15 liters or 16, I don't remember how much it is, we do have about 8 to 9 liters, which is minimum recommended volume for the enclosure. So don't worry, these blocks don't vibrate inside. There, I cut them to length exactly, so they're just literally wedged in there and they're not moving at all. And if they would be moving, we would see that in probably distortion and the impedance that I'm doing with this one. So now, as always, let's jump into the laptop and let's see at all the measurements and all the data. Let's start with the modeling. Now we have both of these 8-inch subwoofers in the same enclosure. I put 15 liters and I gave them their rated power. So we have 400 watts for the recoil and 300 watts for the ESX. This is how the transfer function magnitude looks, and it looks very similar. You can see the ESX has a bit more level. That means that the QTC is a bit higher for the ESX. If we check in box, here we have ESX 0.667 and recoil 0.5. So yes, indeed. That means that both of these subwoofers would benefit more from a little bit smaller enclosure. If we have a look at the cone excursion at these power levels, we do have recoil. You can see the limit is 8.8 millimeters, which is here, and below like 25 is 1 millimeter out of Xmax, so it's totally fine in the bigger box. And the ESX is similar picture, but it goes a bit more above Xmax. So for the ESX, we should ideally bring it down to 250 or something, then you can see 1 millimeter above only. So this is in the bigger enclosure. Now, if we compare the SPL, we do have this where the green line is the ESX and the blue line is the recoil. And this is expected that the ESX is going to have more SPL, more output, just because, as I mentioned before, in sealed enclosure, everything is SD times Xmax. So ESX has more Xmax, and hence it will have probably like 5 dB extra output at lower power as well, because it is more sensitive. We need 250 watts for the ESX, and recoil will take all 400 watts, and the ESX is more efficient and will have more output. So this is one of the difference between a cheaper subwoofer and a much more expensive one. With expensive, you can expect that it's going to have much better performance. Now, by no means I'm saying that recoil is a bad subwoofer. What I'm saying is that it's kind of equivalent to the price point, because not everybody is willing to pay 2 to 3 times more for the same size subwoofer. And this is exactly what I'm trying to show you. What is the difference between an expensive kind of premium subwoofer and a budget one? Now, if we go back to transfer function magnitude and we're gonna reduce the box size to, let's say, 8 liters, which is the smaller version of the box, we do have kind of the same situation. They're very similar. In the transfer function magnitude, it's only 1 dB difference, like here, 45 hertz below and above. If we go back to the cone excursion, now we can see that ESX is way below Xmax, so we can give it full beans 300 watts that is rated, and it's still not reaching the Xmax. It will be totally safe. I think for both of these subwoofers, 10 liters is kind of optimal because it reaches Xmax with the full rated power. But let's keep it at 8. For the recoil, exactly the same, 8 liters, and it does stay below X max. So in the smaller enclosure, you could feed it a bit more than rated power, but again, in a small enclosure, you are risking burning the driver before it goes out of X max. But again, for both of these drivers, about 10-11 liters is the optimal enclosure size. If we're going to compare SPL in a small enclosure, it's kind of the same. Probably a more difference in the higher frequencies, but 5 to 6 dB difference between the ESX, which will have more output, and the Recoil, which will have less output. Now, one note, in the small enclosure, the 8 liters, the ESX has the QTC of 0.789, which is close to 0.8, and the Recoil 0.65. So it is much closer to the 0707 that is considered to be ideal. So again, just repeat myself, optimal enclosure for both of these would be 10 liters, but we are testing them in 8 and 16. Now we're going to have a look at the impedance of both of these. These are post-break-in, so they're broken in. We have Recoil FS in free air about 43, and the ESX a bit lower, about 41. Now ESX has this blip at about 450. This is because of its construction, maybe the surround, maybe the actual cone, and the Recoil, you can see it's smooth as butter. From these two graphs, we can see that the Recoil will have slightly lower inductance compared to the ESX. But in the sub-range, like below 100, they kind of identical. Both of them are dual 2 wired in series, so we do have 4.7 and 5.2, which is kind of 4 ohm nominal. Now in the small enclosure, obviously the FS goes up, and FB in the small enclosure for the Recoil 57.7, and in the bigger one, a little bit lower, FB is 52 or 53, but the difference is very small. If we compare the same enclosure size between these two subwoofers, the FB is kind of identical. It's just the impedance peak is different. And in the large enclosure, again, we can say almost identical. So we do see that both of them perform extremely similar in these two enclosures, and if we compare them between the two. Now we're going to have a look at the RTA. First of all, as always, I'm doing the measurements at different power levels, so you can see every 5 dB increments. There's no really difference between these, but I want to compare, I want to say like number 3, which is going to be between 90 and 100 dB. Now, first of all, let's have a look at the difference between the big enclosure size, which is 16 liters, and the smaller one, which is almost half the size. The difference is, there's almost no difference. You can see like here below like 45 or so, there's like 1 or 2 dB difference. If we're gonna zoom in a little bit more, yeah, you can see that it is a bit of a difference. Now at higher power levels, I did measure only from 30, so maybe let's check number 2, because it's gonna be down to 10 hertz. And yes, you can see the difference between a smaller and larger enclosure is below 45, and with a larger enclosure we are gaining about 1.5 dB up to 2 dB in the lower frequencies, which is not much and not really audible. So I would say better option is just to keep the box smaller, so we'll take less space, because the gain that you're getting from a larger enclosure is not really much. Let's have a look at ESX. With ESX is very similar, but the gain that we're getting between small and large enclosure is below, I want to say like 60 hertz. You can see here it is a bit more level, and we're gaining more compared to the Recoil, because obviously Recoil has a lower QTC a little bit compared to this. And if we compare again these two drivers, let's first compare in the smaller closure. So ESX and Recoil. Recoil does play a little bit lower. I'm just going to zoom out just a tiny bit so we can see a bit more. Just ignore what's happening here. This could be like a box resonance or something, and you're not going to play the subwoofer above 100 anyway. So we're going to look everything below 100. But it's kind of the same. Exactly the same as we saw in the modeling, where in the transfer function magnitude, which is at the same kind of output, they will be like plus minus 1 dB. And here we can see kind of the same, plus minus 1 dB. So this is the big enclosure. Let's have a look at the small enclosure. And in the small enclosure, that's even less difference. We can say that these subwoofers have almost identical frequency response. Yes, you can see like at higher frequencies, there is a bit of a difference, but for the sub bass, is no difference. Plus minus 1 dB, I want to say is the same. And this is perfect for us to have a look at the distortion because they will be playing at exactly the same SPL level. First of all, distortion in the small enclosure. This is the lowest levels, and we can see that ESX at the same SPL level has a bit less distortion. Now the difference is between, like if we have a look here, is less than 0.5%. So again, it's inaudible, but it is measurable. If we increase the power level, number two, again, ESX has less distortion. 3, ESX has less distortion. 4, ESX has less distortion. And 5, again, ESX, this is only from 30 Hertz, has less distortion. So close to the limits of my microphone, you can see like below 60 Hertz here, because above is kind of the same. But below that, ESX has between 2 and like 4%. And Recoil has between 4 and 6%. So kind of double if we're looking at pure numbers. But again, at 30, 40 Hertz, the difference between 2% and 4%, it will be absolutely inaudible. So we can say that these subwoofers will play identical. If we have a look at the larger enclosure size, again, I'm going to show you just a few because they're exactly the same. The Recoil has more distortion at the same SPL. And if you're going to push it to level 5, there we go. Again, ESX, less distortion, Recoil, more distortion. This bump, again, this is a cancellation in the car, so it doesn't really matter. But in all the measurements that I did in all the power levels, the Recoil has double the distortion, almost double the distortion of the ESX driver. So this is another difference between an expensive driver and a cheap driver. Now, I am generalizing, but I think that we can make this conclusion that more expensive driver, from previously you saw that it will have more output, and at the same output level, it will have less distortion. Finally, let's have a look at the impulse. It doesn't matter which ones we're going to compare because all of them are the same. So Recoil on level 2 and ESX on level 2, this is in a larger enclosure. We can say that the impulse is identical and exactly the same. If we compare in a smaller enclosure, Recoil and ESX, again, impulse is exactly the same. And finally, very quickly, just compare Recoil in small and large enclosure. The difference that I'm seeing is that you can see in the small one, the purple line, it is a bit less here and here. So maybe in the larger, the impulse is a bit larger, but it's not shorter. Let's compare the ESX. 2 and 2, identical. To me, they look identical. Maybe in a small enclosure, it's a little bit shorter. Like here, you can see it goes like before and here goes before. But like this difference, again, it's measurable, but clearly it's not going to be audible. And finally, very quickly, let's have a look at the spectrum. I don't remember if I made them in large or small enclosure, but this is basically 30 Hertz of ESX and 30 Hertz of Recoil. So with the Recoil, you can see a higher harmonic here and a higher here. And this is exactly what we saw when THD is a bit higher on the Recoil. 40 Hertz ESX and Recoil. Again, Recoil will have a little bit more of the third harmonic. The second is kind of the same. And 50 Hertz, yeah, the Recoil will have, like here is a bit difficult to see. Let me change the color. There we go. Recoil will have a bit more on the second harmonic. So yes, Recoil has a little bit more distortion compared to the ESX. So let's summarize this. Can this subwoofer be used for SQ purposes? Yes, why not? Now, if we're comparing a cheap budget subwoofer with the premium, much more expensive, like the difference is 2 or 3 times, what we can expect from a more expensive subwoofer compared to the cheap. This is just going to be a summary what we saw. The frequency response is going to be almost identical. There's no differences. The difference is in the sensitivity, because this needs less power to have the same output. The more expensive subwoofer will have more output. This will have a bit less because less Xmax. At the same output level, the cheaper subwoofer will have more distortion. The more expensive one will have less. Now, that difference is not audible. Again, just measurable. You cannot tell the difference on the subwoofer between 1 and 2% and between 2 and 4%. It's not going to be audible at all. Impulse, I want to say, is the same and identical. Is there any benefit going with a larger enclosure? I want to say no, really, because you're not gaining much in the low end, and you can EQ it a bit more if you want to, because the limiting factor is going to be the Xmax. So in summary, this is a great subwoofer. For £100 or $100 or whatever the price is, it's a good subwoofer. If you want more output, obviously you will have to pay more. But again, if you buy 2 of these, they will perform kind of the same as one of that, but you will need obviously a bigger enclosure. So if wood doesn't cost you anything, just get 2 cheaper ones, because why not? But keep in mind that you will need more power to get the same output than this. Probably you will need 300 watts on this, is the same as close to 800 watts on pair of these, because the output wise, if you remember, this had like 5-6 dB more output, so you would need double the cone and double the power to have the same SPL levels. So this is the differences. I hope you learned something new, because this was very, very fun for me as well. Again, thank you Recoil for sending me this. It was very fun playing with this. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with it now, but yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.